Let's talk about one of the reasons why fatherlessness has grown so much since the 1960s in Britain, which is that men don't care about other men's issues, and consequently, men are not doing research on fathers and their issues, whereas mothers and women are doing research. So, as many of you will know, since the 1960s, women have been on particularly because of the force of the feminist movement, have been on a course to redefine a lot of how women relate in the world, how they relate to each other, how they move through the world. And a lot of things have been redefined. So, for example, women expect men no longer to just be the provider, but as a man, you need to be somebody who's compassionate, who is emotionally mature, who is emotionally intelligent, somebody is able to show vulnerability, somebody who's able to show understanding and empathy, whereas these were not requirements prior to the 1960s. Actually, they were requirements, just men didn't do them because society didn't reinforce it. And one of the things that happened was that when many of you will know, I'm at university at the moment studying this subject of why some fathers abandon their children. And one of the things that you have to do when you're in academia and you're doing research is when you write your dissertation, one of the first things that you have to do is you have to do what's called a literature review. In other words, you have to go and find all the research that currently exists on the topic and then review it and talk about it. And then afterwards, you talk about your research. And I basically was finding it really difficult to find research on these social and psychological reasons why fathers were abandoning their children. In other words, if you look at a lot of the research, we've got loads of research on what happens to mothers when they're abandoned, but when their father or the father of the child abandons them. We know what happens to children. We know what happens to women during the divorce system and what happens to them after they try to access support and maintenance and CAFCAS and all of that. But I couldn't find research on men. And I was like, well, this makes no sense. So we have the mother's side, we have the child's side, we know the consequences of all of that, but we don't have men's. And part of the reason is that systemically, from a societal perspective, society doesn't care as much about boys and men and fathers as they do mothers, which is why we don't have a lot of research on these fathers. And secondly, men don't care either. A lot of the research which is done on male issues is supposed, you would think, should be done by men. But actually, when you read a lot of the research is done by women. Men are much more interested in researching things like money and productivity. I'm generalizing, obviously, but men are just not interested in these issues. Hence why we don't have any research for men about why some fathers abandon their children, which is a problem.